So I want to talk about, kind of dig a little bit more into WAWA's work, and I'd like to do a little bit of narration before each of these three videos. So there are three brief videos. One of them is maybe the longest one is a little over 7 minutes, and the other two are really short, kind of in the 2 to 3 minute sort of time frame. But these videos sort of introduce folks to some of our, kind of jewels on the west side of Atlanta. I talked a little bit about some of our challenges on the west side in the talk earlier. And so I didn't want to, even though I didn't get a chance to fully sort of mention this during that talk, I talked about some of the assets, as community members who are engaged in research and activism. But I also wanted to talk about some of our natural resources that are also assets. And the existence of these natural resources is really tied to the work and activism of community members. So Daniela, I don't know if you're still there, but what in just a second I'll ask you, the first video that I'll ask you to share is the video of the Outdoor Activity Center. It may say OAC or Outdoor Activity Center Tour. And so that is sort of the home base of the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance. It's where our offices are, and we are protecting a 26-acre urban forest preserve, and we engage in a lot of environmental education, from K to Gray. So we engage kids, adults, you name it, in learning about the natural world, in learning about how we can be stewards of the natural world, especially in terms of the natural resources in our communities. And we really help to kind of tie the connection between the protection and maintenance and stewardship of these natural resources impacts our health and quality of life. So we really look at it from a very holistic perspective. In the first two videos, I have a colleague who I'm going to call my virtual tour guide. His name is Daryl Haddock. He is the Director of Environmental Education for the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance. He could not make it on today, but I made sure to capture his voice in the video as we kind of tour you and literally walk you through some of the green spaces that WAWA stewards. We steward about 355 acres of green space in Southwest Atlanta. And there are three properties: the Outdoor Activity Center, the Cascade Springs Nature Preserve, and the Lionel Hampton Beecher Hills Preserve. And so we'll start with the Outdoor Activity Center. We'll run the video. I'll tie up a few things, and then we'll move on to the next one.
Welcome to the Outdoor Activity Center. This is a 26-acre nature preserve that's owned by the City of Atlanta, but stewarded by the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance. You're in the heart of the Utorrent Creek watershed at this point. We're going to go in the back into our urban forest and take a look at some of the sites. You'll notice as we take our steps deeper into the forest that it's an old growth forest. Some of these large trees have been around for decades. Many of these trees are hardwood trees, which means that this is a very mature forest. A lot of times, softwoods like pines, they represent very younger forests, much more contemporary. In an urban center like Atlanta, Hardwood forests, or old growth forests as they're also known, are very important features because they help to keep the city cool. And they help to bring the heat island temperatures down so that when people come out to visit, it's always about 15 degrees cooler in this forest under the canopy than it is if you're not in the forest, on the street, for example. I mentioned that the Outdoor Activity Center was 26 acres. So it's a pretty deep property. So we're going to take a little walk a little bit further outside the gate here in the playground area and meet one of the first important spirits in the forest. So I mentioned that I wanted to introduce you to one of the more iconic spirits or beings in the forest. So this is Grandfather Beech. And we know that trees are living beings. But this tree is very significant. You can tell that's been around a long time. And as a beech tree, it should have pretty silver bark, but this tree is scarred and it's been carved on, and people have carved their names on it, and so this tree has seen a lot in its lifetime. And one of the things that makes this tree remarkable is that we've assessed that it's been around since 1863. So imagine how much history this tree has witnessed since it was a sapling. And so many people who come past this community, come past this park, don't know the significant representations of history that are right inside of our gates. And so Grandfather Beech represents that for us. And he's a touch point to the past and a touch point to the future as we think about things like climate resiliency and sustainability, and why preserving these types of spaces is so important for a city like Atlanta. So I mentioned that we're in the Utorrent Creek watershed. And one of the challenges of Atlanta's creeks and streams is that many of them are piped. So part of Utorrent, one of the tributaries of Utorrent, is actually inside of this pipe. And so the challenge is that it's being constrained, the stormwater that would be flowing into the creek that we just walked near as we left the forest is actually being piped and sent to a wastewater treatment plant. And in some respects, because it's stormwater, it's relatively clean and should be reintroduced into the community. It should be back into nature. And so one of the things that we wanted to do is focus on how urban water it gets experienced in urban places. And the fact that much of it is piped and moved so we don't come in contact with it creates challenges, especially in systems that are combined. We have a single pipe that has to catch both stormwater and sanitary sewage. Another thing that we attempted to do, because we really are challenged by having our water system mostly piped, is we created an aquaponics system. So this is a way for us to show off sustainable agricultural practices and still use things like rainwater capture so that we could source the water that we use in the aquaponics system from the raindrops that fall.
You all can hear me at this point or not?
We can.
Okay, great. Thank you. And so I mentioned, before going into this video, that this is, WAWA's home at the Outdoor Activity Center. And we, through an MOU with the City of Atlanta, have been operating in this space, which is in the middle of the Richland Hills and Oakland City communities in Southwest Atlanta. And, we have begun to sort of try to turn this facility around, to transform it, to transform the user and visitor experience there. When we got to the property about 12 years ago, the roof was caving in. When you walk through the front door of the building of the Nature Center there, the floor was caving in under the weight of some of the equipment that was in that front area. The trails were all overgrown. There was no environmental education programming, but this had been a former resource for the West Atlanta community. So we didn't have any money, but somehow the city trusted us and trusted our expertise to try to, to come into this space and to turn it into something that is useful for the community. And so we've been doing that work now for a number of years to try to make that happen. And some of the newest work that we're engaging in is we're working on ultimately developing this space as a resiliency hub for the community. We're also working to establish a fresh food access point. We have a community garden on site that we didn't get a chance to put in as a part of this particular video, but we're working with the surrounding neighborhoods to make those projects happen. So now I'd like to transition just a few miles down the road to the Cascade Springs Nature Preserve. Let me apologize for this video. We did so many different takes in the beginning, in the front of Cascade Springs Nature Preserve, but cars just kind of kept getting us. So you'll kind of hear some cars whizzing by, and it's in the middle of the city of Atlanta, kind of inside of the city limits, and so that's just what we experience. So if we can now roll the video for the Cascade Springs Nature Preserve, and I'll tell you, Daryl will again kind of narrate some things about the facility, about the site, and then I'll tell you about why this site is so important to WAWA.
Welcome to Cascade Springs Nature Preserve. Cascade Springs is a 135-acre nature preserve in Southwest Atlanta. The facility is a hardwood forest, and we have several features here. One of the most interesting ones is a waterfall, but we also have several artesian springs. Let's go in and take a look. Boardwalk trail that takes us into the interior of the park. An interesting feature about this property is that the City of Atlanta owns it, but an organization called the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance has been stewarding the property for several decades, maintaining access and providing assistance to the community to allow it to be kept up, things like the trails done, invasive plants removed, and just educational opportunities and experiences that are done here. So one of the most notable features of Cascade Springs is the artesian springs that flow from the hillside. So this is a pump house that was erected with the family that previously owned the facility. This used to be a place where they planned basically a bed and breakfast. Um, they had bungalows, and back in the early 1900s, people would come outside of the city to stay here, very much like a resort. And so we're in the city of Atlanta at this point, but back in the day, this was considered far outside of the city. And folks would take, at that point, you know, horse and buggies and horseless carriages and come out and visit. And so they would actually sit down in the spring area. They would immerse their bodies in the medicinal waters, and it was a way for folks to use the waters in a medicinal way. And so many of the creeks and streams in the state of Georgia have that same history. Barium springs, warm springs, where people would come and they would utilize the springs and feel some type of healing benefit from the waters. So this is the falls at Turkeyfoot Creek. Turkeyfoot Creek is a small urban stream that connects to Utorrent Creek, and we're actually in the Utorrent Creek watershed. This is a small fall that a lot of people come to visit here in the city. Most of the falls, or very many of the falls around the state, are about 2 hours outside of the city. So this is one of the few places you can come to inside the city of Atlanta and see a water feature like this. And so it's great for habitat. It's great as a draw for people and families to come out and visit and recreate as they enjoy Cascade Springs Nature Preserve.
All right, thank you so much, Daniela, for sharing that video. Cascade Springs is probably my favorite in terms of our green resources in Southwest Atlanta, in terms of the work that WAWA does. What I think is worth noting about this space, which in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic is so heavily visited, so heavily populated. In fact, on this day, I was surprised. I think we got out there perhaps before most of the crowds, but it's been overwhelming to see the visitors that we have at Cascade Springs Nature Preserve. But just a few short years ago, this space, as beautiful as it is, was only open to our community Monday through Friday from 8 o'clock a.m. until 3 o'clock p.m. You saw in the beginning that there was a sort of a fence around the front entrance. And so what used to happen is that the City Parks Department employees would come and open it up around 8 o'clock a.m. And before they got off of their shift in the evening, they would come and close it. The challenge was that the surrounding community of Southwest Atlanta, which is largely an African-American community, did not have access to this facility because it was only open when most people were working or their kids or grandchildren were at school. When WAWA first started to try to open it up to be a resource to the community, and Daryl sort of mentioned that we've been stewards of this space for decades, along with the city, and we're trying to push and prod them to make some investments along with the newly formulated Friends of Cascade Springs Nature Preserve, and we're a part of that effort as well. But before kind of WAWA pushed to make some changes, people could not have access to it. And so when we first started to open it up, we had some engagement days. We got the city to open it up on Saturdays, and we held events there and, led people on tours. And what we heard from residents was that, people said, we've lived here for 20, 30 years, and we've never been inside. We've never been able to see what was behind these gates because it was always closed. So we asked the city if they could open it up, at least, for people to access it on the weekends, and they said that they couldn't. So we tried and we tried and we tried to get them to do that, and they said that they just could not do it. They didn't have the resources. They didn't have personnel working on the weekends to be able to do that. And so then we said, well, let us open it. Let us provide access to the community. And after a lot of negotiation, they allowed us to do that. They turned over the keys, and for about 14 years, WAWA board members, primarily, and their families, woke up every Saturday and Sunday to be at the gate at 7 o'clock a.m. to open it up and to close it at 7 p.m. in the evening so that our community could have access to it, to this wonderful resource, 135-acre hardwood forest with a beautiful waterfall right in our community. And just a few years ago, the city of Atlanta actually invested in an electronic fence. So we no longer have to give our Saturdays and Sundays to do that. You know, sometimes it would kind of make for long days. You'd wake up early to get it open, and we would have a lot of challenges getting people out of it at 7 o'clock p.m. because they, you know, love this site. And so people from all over the city, all over the country, and even all over the world have come to visit Cascade Springs. And we know that that is in part because we really pushed to make sure that our community had equitable access to the green space in our very community. So I'll stop there. And the last stop that I'd like to share with you all is the Hampton Beecher Nature Preserve. The Hampton part is named after the late jazz great Lionel Hampton, and he previously owned part of this property and donated it to be a part of a path trail, like a paved path trail that is built by an organization called the Path Foundation. Later on, WAWA actually worked at that time as an all-volunteer organization. We raised over $2.5 million to save this property from development, to keep it as green space. The community living in closest proximity to it said that we want this area kept as green space. And it was initially slated for the development of about 121 single-family unit homes. It was going to be a gated community. And it's in the middle of a middle-class neighborhood, but with this gated community, you know, the folks who were looking to develop this were going to develop homes that were going to sell for over $500,000. And so that was going to threaten even this middle-class community in terms of people's ability to stay in place in this neighborhood that they had, in many cases, raised their families in. So we're going to visit the Hampton Beecher Preserve for just a couple of minutes. This one doesn't have narration. We did add a little bit of jazz music to it in light of the connection to Lionel Hampton. And I want to publicly credit Adriana Garcia for helping to capture this footage and to edit it so that we could use it on today. Thank you so much again, Daniela, for that. So I am pretty much at my close, but I wanted to share some of our community assets and strengths as well. And I tried to weave in some stories around how the community and how the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance is involved in stewarding these spaces. When we talk about trying to grow a cleaner, greener, healthier, and more sustainable West Atlanta, it's about fighting, kind of things that we see to be negative, but it's also about building on these positive assets that in many cases are there because community members fought to have those spaces there, whether it's, the work that we did at Hampton Beecher that you just saw to preserve that land, that beautiful space, to keep it from being developed, or the work at Cascade Springs, another beautiful space that our community just didn't have access to, or the work that we're doing at the Outdoor Activity Center to fundamentally transform the experience that people get when they come there, taking this neglected, overlooked asset and trying to breathe new life into it. So that work is ongoing. It's critical, to the well-being of our communities. And I believe it's really critical to all of Atlanta because these are assets that that not only can be enjoyed by members of the West Atlanta community, but by people from across the Atlanta region and beyond. And in fact, we see visitors from all over who come to these spaces, especially during this pandemic. We've seen a huge uptick in the visitation. So I'll stop there and see if there are any questions. I know we're kind of pretty much at time, but I think I was told that we could go over slightly if people had questions or wanted to ask anything.
So one of the questions that we got is what are WAWA's plans for the next few years?
So for the next few years, a lot of what we're, trying to do, quite honestly, is to build, capacity. We have a small staff and lots of volunteers who do the work. And so we're just trying to solidify that base so that we can expand our reach and be a lot more impactful in that work. We do a lot with almost no resources. And so we're really, trying to just solidify, our base kind of financially, which is a little bit challenging during this time. But I think there are also some new opportunities for us right now. And we are really just doubling down on our efforts to steward these spaces on the southwest side of town. And we're also working on some initiatives on the northwest side of town in the Proctor Creek watershed, where we've had, a lot of long-standing work as well. And so that work, is around, a lot of, kind of pollution prevention, a lot of engagement in community science. And then we're trying to bring some of that community science work more to the Utorrent Creek watershed, to these three spaces. A lot of that citizen science work looks like water quality monitoring, but also inventorying the species that we have in these forests to kind of help us to fully understand, what the capacity is for these forests to sequester carbon and things like that. So there are lots of interesting questions that we want to pursue as we continue to maintain these spaces, get more money to maintain them, and then get more investment so that we can revitalize them. There's a lot of infrastructure. There are a lot of infrastructure needs at each of the spaces that we showed you on today. And so we are doing our best to raise dollars to be able to make those investments to give our community what they deserve in terms of these amazing natural resources.
Thank you, Na'Taki, for that wonderful explanation. So I looked and we did not have any more questions or comments. So as I mentioned earlier, in the interest of time, I want to thank you again on behalf of the program for a wonderful day. And I wish you and all of the attendees a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for making it today, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.